When you spend decades in the shadows, you learn to recognize other ghosts. That's why Thomas knew, the moment Eleanor walked into Sunset Gardens Assisted Living, that his past had finally caught up with him. But let me take you back to where it really began. Moscow, 1974. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and suspicion. You might think the Cold War was fought with missiles and tanks, but you'd be wrong. It was waged in whispers across cafe tables and through encrypted messages passed between strangers who never exchanged names. Thomas Harrington, though nobody called him that then, sat at the corner table of the Bolshoi bar, nursing a glass of vodka he hadn't actually sipped. His contact was late, 20 minutes and counting. In this business, 15 was concerning, 20 was dangerous. That's when she walked in. You know how some moments burn themselves into your memory? That was one of Thomas's. The woman with auburn hair that caught the light just so, wearing a blue dress that was neither too flashy nor too plain. Perfect camouflage. But what gave her away to Thomas was how she scanned the room. Left corner first, then right, then the bar, noting exits before ever making eye contact with anyone. A professional. She wasn't his contact, he was certain of that, which meant she was either KGB watching his contact or, more troubling, watching him. But I'll come back to that moment, because what Thomas didn't know then would haunt him for the next 40 years. You see, when you're living under deep cover, the first rule they teach you is simple: trust no one. The second rule is even simpler: forget the first rule at your peril. Eleanor Smith, though that wasn't her name then either, had been tracking a leak in British intelligence. Someone was selling secrets, and her handlers believed the exchange would happen that night. "May I join you?" she asked in flawless Russian, standing beside Thomas's table. What would you do in that moment? Every instinct in Thomas's body screamed danger, but sometimes in the field, the most dangerous move is the safest one. "Please," he replied, gesturing to the empty chair. And just like that, two chess pieces from opposite sides of the board sat face to face, each believing they were controlling the game. "You come here often?" she asked, a glimmer of something, amusement, in her eyes. "Often enough to know you don't," he countered. There it was, the smallest twitch at the corner of her mouth. Recognition, acknowledgement. Now, you might be thinking this is where they revealed their true identities, fell madly in love, and ran off together. But real spycraft doesn't work that way. What happened instead was far more complex and ultimately more heartbreaking. For the next 3 weeks, they circled each other carefully. Coffee at the same cafe, casual encounters at the museum, a shared taxi during a downpour, each meeting calculated to appear coincidental. Thomas reported the mysterious woman to his handler, of course. "Keep her close," came the instruction. "Find out who she works for." What Thomas didn't report were the moments in between. The way she hummed Tchaikovsky under her breath when nervous. How she always turned the pages of books from the bottom corner. The scar on her wrist she absently traced when deep in thought. You start noticing these things when someone occupies your thoughts, even when that someone might be your enemy. On their 5th meeting, she slipped him a note with a simple address. No time, no explanation. Would you have gone? Thomas debated for hours. It could be a trap. It probably was a trap. But curiosity, that most dangerous of emotions for a spy, won out. The address led to a small apartment above a bookstore in a quiet neighborhood. Thomas checked for surveillance, found none, and still waited an extra hour before approaching. Standard procedure, though nothing about this felt standard. She opened the door before he knocked. "I was starting to think you wouldn't come," she said in English. Perfect, unaccented English. And that's when Thomas realized he'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. The room behind her was filled with photos, surveillance photos, of Thomas, meeting with his contacts, exchanging documents, making dead drops. She knew exactly who he was. "MI6, she said simply. "And you're CIA. We have a problem, Thomas." That was the first time she'd used his real name. The effect was like being doused in ice water. But here's where the story takes its first surprising turn. Because Eleanor wasn't there to expose him or eliminate him. "There's a double agent," she explained, pointing to a photo of Thomas's handler. "He's been selling information to both sides, playing us against each other, and now he's set you up to take the fall. You know that feeling when your entire world shifts beneath your feet? When everything you believed to be true suddenly isn't?" Thomas felt it like a physical blow. "Why are you telling me this?" he demanded, hand instinctively reaching for his concealed weapon. "Because I've been watching you for months," she admitted. "And you're a good agent, but more importantly, you're a good man. And I don't want to see you executed for someone else's treachery." What followed was a night that would define the next 4 decades of their lives. Working together, American and British intelligence, they collected the evidence needed to expose the double agent. But in those urgent hours, as they pored over documents and photographs, something else happened. Something neither was trained for. You might call it connection. You might call it chemistry. Whatever it was, by the time dawn broke over Moscow, Thomas knew with absolute certainty that Eleanor was someone he couldn't walk away from. And yet, that's exactly what he had to do. Because here's what they don't tell you in spy novels. There's no happily ever after for deep cover agents. There's only the mission. "We can never acknowledge this again," Eleanor said as they burned the last of the evidence linking them. "For your safety. For mine." "What if we both got out?" Thomas suggested, the words surprising even himself. "After this mission. Clean breaks. New identities." The look she gave him, part longing, part resignation, still appeared in his dreams decades later. "They'd never let us go," she whispered. "You know that." She kissed him then. Just once. A goodbye that felt like a beginning that could never be. And then she was gone. Thomas was extracted from Moscow 3 days later after his handler was taken into custody. Eleanor disappeared completely. But that's not where their story ends. It's barely where it begins. Because when you've connected with someone at that level, when you've trusted someone with your life, your real identity, your true self, you don't simply forget them. For years, Thomas searched. Discreetly, of course. A query here. A favor called in there. Always careful never to raise suspicions. But Eleanor had vanished as completely as morning mist. You might wonder why he didn't move on. Thomas wondered that himself, especially during his brief, failed marriage in the 80s. But some people leave fingerprints on your soul that no amount of time can erase. The decades passed. The Cold War ended. Thomas eventually left fieldwork, moved to analysis, and finally retired altogether. Life settled into a quiet rhythm. He bought a small house on the Maine coast, grew vegetables, read books, tried not to think about auburn hair and the scent of lilac perfume mixed with gunpowder. Till last Tuesday when his nephew helped him move into Sunset Gardens. Assisted living after a fall left Thomas with a broken hip and the reluctant admission that living alone at 87 might not be wise. "You'll like it here, Uncle Tom," his nephew assured him. "They have activities, other people your age to talk to." What his nephew didn't know, couldn't know, was that one of those other people was Eleanor Jackson, resident of room 237, who had been living at Sunset Gardens for the past 8 months. Thomas recognized her immediately. Despite the 40 years that had passed, the auburn hair had faded to silver. The sharp angles of her face had softened. But her eyes, those piercing green eyes that had seen through his cover in seconds, were unchanged. She was sitting in the common room, solving a crossword puzzle with the same intensity she had once applied to breaking Soviet codes. And when she looked up and saw him, something flashed across her face. Recognition. Shock. And then, most painfully, nothing at all. Because Eleanor Smith or Jackson or whatever name she was using now looked right through Thomas as if he were a stranger. You can imagine the confusion, the hurt. Had he made a mistake? Was this just an elderly woman who happened to bear a striking resemblance to the only person who had ever really known him? No, he was certain. This was Eleanor. But as the days passed, she continued to treat him with the polite indifference she showed all the new residents. "Good morning," she would say at breakfast. "Looks like rain today," she might observe in the elevator, never once acknowledging their shared past. It was maddening. It was heartbreaking. And then, on his 5th night at Sunset Gardens, Thomas found a note slipped under his door. "Still checking for surveillance before entering a room, I see. Some habits never die. Library. Midnight." You can probably guess what Thomas felt in that moment. Hope. Fear. The sudden youthful pounding of a heart that had no business racing at his age. The Sunset Gardens library was small, just 3 bookshelves and a couple of armchairs, but at midnight it was deserted. Eleanor was waiting, sitting ramrod straight, in a chair by the window, moonlight casting her profile in silver. "Hello, Thomas," she said without turning. "It's been a while." He approached slowly, his cane making soft thumps on the carpet. 40 years, 1 month, and approximately 16 days, but who's counting? That earned him a smile, the same smile that had haunted him across continents and decades. "Why are you pretending not to know me?" he asked, lowering himself into the chair opposite her. "Protocol," she replied simply. "Old habits. Eleanor, we're in a retirement home in New Hampshire. I think we're past protocol." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Thomas saw something he'd never seen in their brief time together all those years ago. Fear. "They told me you were dead," she whispered. "In the 82, a car accident in Berlin." Thomas felt his breath catch. "Who told you that?" "My handler. I'd been asking questions looking for you. They didn't like that." "And you believed them?" "I had to." Her hands twisted in her lap. "Just like you believed whatever they told you about me." The realization hit Thomas like a physical blow. All these years they had both been searching, both been lied to. I never stopped looking, he admitted. Never stopped hoping. Eleanor reached across the space between them, her fingers, now gnarled with arthritis, touching his hand. I know. That's why we have to be careful even now. You might be wondering if that's paranoia talking. The delusions of two elderly former spies living in the past. But Thomas knew better. You think we're still being watched? He asked quietly. I know we are, she replied. Room 118, former NSA analyst. Room 205, retired FBI. The woman who runs the front desk? Ex-military intelligence. Thomas had noticed some of it himself. Too many former government employees for coincidence. Too many knowing glances when new residents arrived. This isn't just a retirement home, is it? He asked, though he already knew the answer. It's where they put us when they don't know what else to do with us, Eleanor confirmed. People who know too much to be truly free, but who've served too well to be eliminated. The truth settled between them. Sunset Gardens was a gilded cage, a comfortable prison for old spies. So what now? Thomas asked. We pretend to be strangers during the day and meet in secret like teenagers? The smile that crossed Eleanor's face then made her look decades younger. I was thinking more along the lines of a jailbreak. And just like that, Thomas felt something he hadn't felt in years, the thrill of a new mission. But this time, the mission wasn't for country or ideology. It was for them. Tell me more, he said, leaning forward. Eleanor's eyes sparkled with the same intelligence and determination that had captured his heart in Moscow so many years ago. First, she said, we need to figure out who else here we can trust. Then we need access to the administrative computers. And then Thomas Harrington, we finish what we started 40 years ago. We disappear. Together this time. As he looked at Eleanor in the moonlight, Thomas realized something important. Some missions aren't meant to be completed in days or weeks. Some take a lifetime. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get a second chance to complete them. The mission he never completed was about to begin again, but that's a story for another day.